This conference will now be recorded.
Oh yeah, green line. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm not sure if to me it sounds like I'm not being picked up very loudly, but hopefully in the room you can hear me. Is it okay? Yeah. Maybe we what do we do? Main volume here, Diane? Mic volume?
Are there speakers back here? Is this because
Is that any better? No? We can maybe do the main volume. I don't know. The main volume. Is that any better? It sounds better to me. It sounds a little better to me. All right. So welcome, everyone. It's really gratifying to see such a big group on this tremendously busy season. So thank you for coming out today. There's so much going on in Syracuse. I hope you have time this weekend to check out all those cultural events that are happening around the community. Green Bag Lunch today is going to focus on a couple of areas that generally fall into our 12 traits in the culture arts area to a large extent. The preservation of community heritage is often undervalued, but it's necessary. Communities must actively celebrate, create, identify, and participate in that heritage and promote it. But also governmental leadership policies talk about innovation and the need for solving the toughest problems, requiring a significant dose of out-of-the-box thinking. So today we're going to sort of touch around those issues, I think, although I don't really know what Jason is going to be telling us today. But Jason has been involved in a couple of organizations, ReThink Syracuse and ReThink I-81. So I'm really looking forward to hear what he has to say. Before, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the genesis of this. But let's do a little quick around the room as we normally do so that Jason can have an idea or I can have an idea of who's here. So it's Greg in the first seat here. So why don't you start us off, introduce yourself and just give us maybe who you're with if you want to tell us that.
I'm here as a community member and I participate in
Greg's a frequent flyer here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next table. David.
Yeah, David Ashley, Emeritus Partner at Ashley McGraw Architects and Green USA member.
Green USA founder.
Bob Haley, I'm a Green USA follower, somewhat close to founding, but not like that guy. And I'm interested in sustainable planning for the future, and Jason's work here has been a good part of it for many years, so I look forward to this.
Natalie Evans, happens to be Jason's wife, also a community member, architect, but also owner of the Sweet and Practice Bakery.com.
All right. Jeff Anthony, been hanging around with Green USA for a couple months. I work in residential energy efficiency. I'm on North Side board. I happen to see someone from that organization here too. So.
Keisha Martin, program director at NADA.
Dan Romeo, I'm on the Board of Education for the Syracuse City School District and just a lifelong Syracuse resident.
Dick Schutzo, Greening USA member, and I'm here representing my Blue Rock Solar.
Right.
Mitch Berkman, Greening USA member. Bob Chrysler, Greening USA member.
Ken Bowles, Greening USA member and an architect.
Joshua Wilcox, just finished my first year graduate school at the University of Buffalo Planning Program yesterday. So my first year. I'm also a graduate of Ken Bowles.
Hey, very proud.
I'm David Maynard, lifelong resident of Syracuse, and I came here to see if my ideas matched up with Jason's.
Former principal of Nottingham High.
Oh, right.
Hi guys, I'm John Ferguson. I'm with Assemblyman Bill Magarelli's office, lifelong Syracuse member or Syracuse resident, and yep, just want to say hello. Thanks, guys.
I'm Melanie Hale, Greening USA member, be very active in organization for green space advocacy for many years, board member of that.
Melanie's also a board member, if I can add that.
Diane Brandley, and yep, I've been with Greening USA since this guy came over and said, I'm making this green group, you want to be part of it? So.
Remember the suit he was designing at that time? Greenie?
Oh, no, I don't want to talk
All right.
about it. Anyway, I want to thank the Syracuse Center of Excellence for allowing us to continue to use this beautiful facility and all of their electronic equipment. And there is a note up on the podium about acknowledging the fact that we are on the ancestral territory of the Haudenosaunee, and we're very grateful for their stewardship of the environment. Greening USA is nonprofit, educational, and none of us gets a penny for what we do. We do have small expenses that we need to meet. If you feel like we're bringing valuable services to our community, I urge you to become a member. We have forms just outside the door there. Also, if you are not on our mailing list, we have a free electronic newsletter, no obligation whatsoever, and we don't share a mailing list, and that sign up for the newsletter is also outside the door if you'd like to. We list in our newsletter activities of other like-minded organizations that are looking to help create a sustainable future. So take it away, Joan.
Did you mention fundraising?
Fundraising.
It's that time of year again, you know, the Christmas giving season. So if you have anything you want to give away, Greening USA would always be happy to accept your donation and give due credit where credit is due. But today, let me give a little due credit to an acquaintance of mine, Jim Emmons, who opened my eyes to Jason's work when I was talking to Jim, Jim heads up the Syracuse Poster Project. And I saw Jim at the Arts and Crafts Festival, and I'm not quite sure what we talked about, how it came up, but I kind of mentioned, wouldn't it be nice to have like a permanent square space in Syracuse where people could kind of hang out and it would be active all the time and things like that. And he says, well, you know, I have a friend that's sort of like thinks along these lines. And I said, who's that? Jason. And so I put Jason on my radar. We tried to schedule Jason a few months ago, and we ran into difficulties with that day. But I've been persevering, and Jason has hung in there with us. And so we have Jason Evans here today. Jason was a board member with the Syracuse Poster Project at one time, I understand. Also, about 3 years ago, was designated by the Central New York Business Journal as one of the 40 under honorees for 2016. I'm going to let Jason tell you all about his work. Perhaps you'll hear about his work as an architect, a graphic artist, or a blogger. He currently is an associate principal at Ashley McGraw Architects. I think he's been working there for about 10 years. Bachelor's in architecture from Syracuse University, a local kid growing up right here in Syracuse. He's registered as an architect in New York State, LEED accredited. Jason, it's an honor to have you here today. So it's all yours.
Well, thank you. I have a tendency to migrate away from the microphone often. So if you can't at any time hear me, just wave your arms wildly and I'll try to come back to this point again. So with that, yes.
We're recording this, so we have to.
Okay, well, I'll make sure that I'll do my best. I apologize in advance to anyone who's listening to this remotely if I wander away. So as mentioned, I've been a lifelong resident of Syracuse. Grew up here, love the place, and am constantly, my mind is always constantly churning and thinking about what we have and how great it is and what things are missing. Well, my wife and I are traveling or just sitting at home and just kind of churning and thinking. A lot of things are constantly popping into my brain. And over the years, I've kind of amassed all of these things, these ideas and these thoughts, and created images out of them and all kinds of things, which I'll get into. But I just wanted to preface this whole thing in saying there's way too much to cover in about an hour. And so I will A, be talking very fast probably, and slow me down if I'm talking too fast. And B, I tried to cull and remove as much as possible as I'm like dumping things into this presentation and realizing it's getting very bloated and inflated very fast. So I was talking to Diane and she was mentioning how there's been a lot of conversation around Route 81 over the last year, and especially in these lunch sessions specifically, which I am very riled up about too. As mentioned, I'm part of one of the members of ReThink 81 to get rid of the highway and put something better in its place. But I purposely kind of went light on that in this presentation and kind of wanted to talk about bigger picture Syracuse things. And instead of just talking about it kind of theoretically, let's just go through this. So I grew up here. I went to university. I went to the university at SU, School of Architecture. And like I said, I love it. The neighborhoods downtown, like no matter where you go in the city, it's beautiful and lively and excellent. So I graduated from this place in 2008, and it was kind of an interesting time in the position of the school. At that time, if anyone remembers, the university bought this building downtown, the warehouse, and the School of Architecture moved down there for a few years. And so I was right in the middle of all of that. So I was on campus for a couple of years, and then I was downtown for a couple of years, which I'm sure influenced a lot of just me as I kind of grew and evolved as a person, just being so embedded in the city and so engaged with everything that's going on via that. And so now, many years later, I spend still most of my time downtown in a different capacity. I work at McGraw Architects, founded by Mr. Ashley, who's amongst us. And as mentioned, I've been here a little over a decade, and I don't want to go through the projects that I've done over the years, because you can go online and see all those. I want to talk about some of these other ideas that have been floating around, but just wanted to give a little flavor of, this is where I spend my days. I will only mention that I was one of the designers on this, and then talk no more about architecture for now. So Syracuse. So I don't exactly remember when this whole little offshoot started, this thing that I've been calling ReThink Syracuse over the years. But it grew again out of my love and passion for the city, and kind of the observation that a lot of people can often kind of get down on the city and can't wait till they move away, or wish that the snow would stop, or whatever thing may happen or people may bring up. And I wanted to try to start shifting that mentality, even in the slightest, at least amongst my friends or people I interact with. And it kind of started with this. As we talk about Syracuse and what it is, it's a city of neighborhoods. And just on a whim, I had this side passion for graphic design, and I created this map of the city. It's not the official map of all the neighborhoods. There's a lot of other nooks and crannies and smaller sub neighborhoods in here, but this is kind of my mental map of what I feel the city of Syracuse neighborhoods are. And as this kind of just sat there and percolated, and people would always ask me, like, so where does this neighborhood start and where does this neighborhood end? And I have this little handy reference, but it really doesn't, it's not really that constrained to these lines on a map. And so this kind of evolved into me trying to kind of really figure out what the essence of all these neighborhoods are. So I'd hop on my bike, and this is clearly not Syracuse, but it's one of the only images of me on a bike I could find. And I'd bike around and take photos in the neighborhoods, and try to figure out what the essence and the icon of the neighborhood is. And I started creating these prints kind of in the style of the national park prints, and there's others around like that you've seen over time. But just this kind of like simplified, like high contrast, like image that try to evokes the neighborhood. And then, you know, it kept going around and creating this series and trying to figure out like what makes each neighborhood tick. You know, it was 30 something neighborhoods, and I still haven't made one for every neighborhood, but I've tried to capture as many as I can. And eventually somebody saw these. I had a handful of them, again, just for fun, and it had them printed out a little postcard size, and somebody saw them and said, "Can I have one of those? I'd pay you for it." It's like, really? So I ended up printing them at different sizes and different colors and packaging them. And there's some random pop-up art show like 10 years ago that I just somehow weaseled my way into, and people loved it. It's like, oh, this is great. You know, so I started to kind of to take that this thing that was getting people excited about these neighborhoods in Syracuse and try to expand a little bit on that a little bit further. And started creating postcards and these bumper stickers that celebrate, you know, the Syracuse in the middle of the state. And then these icons of the city, like the water tower in Franklin Square. I created this little graphic of the Salt City with the skyline on top of the salt shaker, and started putting these on t-shirts and all kinds of other things, tote bags. And then evolved into having this, you know, semi-regular presence at art shows. And I wasn't doing it because people were forking over money, but I was doing it because when I was at these events, I get into these really amazing, engaging conversations with people that walk up and have a story about the neighborhood they grew up in, or this thing that they remember, or this idea they've had for, you know, something in the city, and it spurred this conversation that was really kind of invigorating and got me excited. And so that kind of continued to evolve and grow, and get communication from people in the city, for example, asking if I'd do a quick little banner for Hanover Square. The Convention and Visitors Bureau, Visit Syracuse, contacted me and said, we've had this kind of tired, dated logo for the longest time. And they had engaged with a firm in Boston, I think, and just they were struggling. They were noting that this firm was just not really getting what Syracuse is. And so terrifyingly, they asked me to put my impression of what the essence of Syracuse as a city is. And I won't go through the whole kind of series of iterations, but through this evolutionary process, you know, it came up with this logo, which is now, you can see it plastered on billboards, and not really, but at least on these banners around town and so on. And this became kind of the official seal kind of for the Visit Syracuse campaign. So if you look closely enough, it's all kind of the idea of these interconnected neighborhoods and towns and regions, all these dots, and they spell out SYR. If you squint at it, you can see it. And then once you see it, you probably can never not see it again. But the do your thing was not my tagline. I just did the graphic up here. And so that's kind of a little background of, you know, how I got started and getting into this mindset of like trying to better the city and really engage with it and do what I can to infuse my energy into all of this. And another way that this happened was through community art. So that was kind of my individual stuff, and then this is stuff that myself and a larger group kind of got involved in, and, you know, just kind of show you different scales. So once you get a team involved, you can do much bigger and more interesting, I don't want to say more interesting, but bigger and larger scale things. So one of the early things we did, the Public Arts Task Force, which is still going strong, has for years been creating these really interesting bike racks and scattering them around the city. And everyone's different and unique and designed by different people. So this is the one that I had my hand in, this idea of these things that look like bike tires kind of anchored into the ground, and they're the perfect height to lock your bike up to. And myself and one other person figured out how to actually build the things, and he actually had skills in welding and was able to put them together. And then this was the end result. So the idea is also that they're painted different shades of green so that they kind of look like plants that are sprouting up in an otherwise heavily concreted part of, this is Hanover Square. And I think they were pretty successful. Another really fun one was thinking into the history of the Syracuse, and I won't go into this in too much detail because we all know that the Erie Canal used to run right through downtown on Erie Boulevard, what is now Erie Boulevard, and the only real kind of hints to that past are the footprint of Clinton Square, the fountain there, the Erie Canal Museum, maybe little bits here and there. So we wanted to do something to bring even more awareness to the fact that this ran right through our town, and the city was built around the canal. And so we designed this idea of, or I guess firstly conceptually, there's this idea to paint the street, to really literally put something on the street where the canal used to be. And so we came up with this idea to create this barcode on the street. So it's not just painting it a solid blue, but it has additional effect and meaning. And the thought is when you look down along the street, because you have all these lines at different widths and spacings, it almost looks like the water would be shimmering. And then if and when you could ever get up into the sky or in Google Maps and see this thing, and if you actually scanned it with a barcode scanner, it actually says the name of the art piece, which is Artery Syracuse. And I've never actually tried it. We scanned the paper image, but we never actually went into Google Maps to see if it would work. But in any case, this is weeks-long process, and eventually we got all the permits that we needed to close down the street for a weekend. And here we are as we're running out and getting the thing started. Put our lovely official, quasi-official signage to keep or divert people around the street when we're on it painting. And then day one, we started actually measuring out and chalking out where these lines go for this 2-block stretch. Through a lot of research and talking to people, actually Lewis and Tanner Paints right here downtown, they informed us the best paint to use for this application is actually road paint. So it'll withstand the scraping of the plows and the wear and tear of people driving over it and so on. And it turns out road paint comes in 3 colors. There's white, the yellow, the center line, and then handicap blue, and that's it. And so we thought, as we started thinking about it, we realized, we could probably make more colors out of this too. So we actually did a 50-50 blend of the white and the blue and had this kind of nice light blue color in the end. And so we had hundreds of these 5-gallon jugs and had somebody just constantly mixing them together and feeding us paint as we went. So we actually had a space temporarily in the State Tower building. We were able to mix all this in and then just walk it down around the corner over to Erie Boulevard. And what was so great about this is that there's already a pretty big team that was figuring out how to make this thing work, of which I was just a part of, but also it drew in a lot more people. Once the word got out that we're doing this, people started flocking down to the site, and people even just like walking by in the street would stop and ask, "What are you doing? Like, this is really cool. Can I help?" And the answer was always yes. Like, we had plentiful paint rollers and paintbrushes, and just got people involved for the whole weekend. It was, we had planned it to take 3 days, and we actually did it in 2 because so many people just wandered over and were so willing and excited to help. And it was a very hot weekend, so actually we did a lot of our work into the night when it was cooling off. And in the end, this is what it looked like. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide if it really evokes that idea of the shimmering water, and you can have your own opinions about it. But we were all very, very proud of it when it was done. And we actually, because we had the street closed for a 3rd day, I don't have a photo of this, but we actually put up a bunch of tables in the middle of the street and had brunch because we were supposed to be working that day and the street was closed, but it was done. So we were able to have some fun with it. And it lasted for quite a few years. We had I think after the first 2 years, we had another painting party and we're able to touch it up and repaint it again. But now over the years, it's faded a lot. And this is still a couple of years ago, and you can see it's fading, and now it's pretty much non-existent. It's more or less worn off. At the very edges along the curbs, you might see some remnants of it. If anybody feels like painting, we can probably revive it again.
What year did you do that, Jason? Recall the year?
I wish I remember. I want to say it was probably like 2011 or 12, around then, when we did the first pass at it.
So it lasts 4 to 5 years or something like that?
No, it was 7 or 8 years ago, I think, at least, yeah. But what was So what was so fun about this is that, like I mentioned, all the people that were coming in, engaging and participating in this, but then after the fact too, if anyone knows Natalie Stenson at the Erie Canal Museum, she was mentioning how, they would always bring these busloads of kids down to tour the Canal Museum, and they'd take them to the Waylock building and point out the window and say, this used to be the canal. And most of the younger kids just wouldn't get it. They're like, no, it's a street. What do you mean? Like, and now they were to point to this, and they had this, all these kids always all of a sudden have these aha moments, and they realized, like, they would see this blue and they could put one and one together and say, this is where the water was? Yeah, it's amazing. And it's just a fun kind of follow-up to that. And then a little bit after that, the downtown committee got a hold of me and said, we have this plaza that we stare at our window. This is the view out their window at the corner of Fayette and Salina. They've been staring at forever, and it's, ever since the bus station moved out of there, it's been kind of derelict and empty, and nobody's been using it. And so at the same time, the then mayor, Stephanie Miner, had this idea bubbling that they wanted to do a larger project and completely transform this park. So I was approached in the meantime to do something in the meantime, and think about, is there a low cost, high impact way to just dress this up and draw some attention to it and try to get people to use it again? And I said, well, I know how to mix and apply paint pretty well from this other project. And so came up with a scheme for painting all the hard surfaces in this park. And so the idea was, there's this, you can see it on here, there's a diagonal line that runs through that's already there. It's kind of a cut through from the corner. There's I don't know the whole history of it, but there's a rail line that has been placed there kind of as a memorial to, I think, the streetcars that used to run through the center of the city. But in any case, it was actually a pretty well-used diagonal cut through. So the idea was to kind of play that up and continue that line all the way through the paved part too. And then because there's so much stuff around the plaza, there's trees and lampposts and all kinds of things that are scattered around. So it's to create this idea of these kind of like lines and waves radiating off of that main path, and then they bend and twist. You can kind of see around all the stuff that's on the site. So it makes it a little bit more playful, and and as you traverse the site and go from here to there, you can follow the lines or jump over them and kind of interact with them in fun ways. So there was the same kind of principle as the Erie Boulevard project, is to get as many people involved as possible and to get people in and painting and engaging with this. Although I have to say this is a lot more difficult to lay out all those lines at these funny angles with these curves and so on than it was just to measure straight lines in the middle of the street. But in the end, it's a little sloppy, but in a good way. Like, it's sloppy because there's no way to make this perfect, but I think it shows the input. There's a lot of different hands in this, and the idea was not to make it perfect, but to make it really engaging and have a lot of hands on it and get people involved in it. Here it is from above. But I'm sure many of you have gone by this and wondered what the heck this thing is. And it was supposed to be there for about a year and then be torn up, but it ended up sitting there for, I don't know how long, like 5 years, until finally this summer, the city did start the project of tearing out that plaza and redoing parts of it. So it did end up pretty faded over time. But it was the same mix of traffic paints. We actually looked at different colors here because we could use a different type of paint that didn't need to resist wear as much since vehicles aren't driving over it. But in the end, everyone loved the blue, and so blue it is. I'm gonna bring my phone so I can see what time it is, so I don't ramble on for too many things for too long and leave time for questions. So that's that, and that's. I don't want to just keep going on about my background and things that I've done for too long, but it was kind of to set this part up now. Kind of simultaneously at the same time, as I was mentioning, I've had all these always talking to friends and annoying them about all these like ideas that I have for the city and things to improve it and so on. And I think somebody had mentioned, well, why don't you just write them down? Like, stop telling us about them, just write them down. And so I started this blog called ReThink Syracuse, and it lately has been kind of dormant but I'll go through some of the initial things that went on there. And the hope and the thought is that, you know, these are some specific ideas of things that I've noticed over the years, but what I hope the takeaway is that it really kind of spurs on and continues a dialogue and discussion around, get people thinking about, you know, things don't always have to be exactly as they are. There are simple or low impact or low cost ways that we can engage and improve our community. Some of these are completely crazy and not achievable, and some of them we can do tomorrow if we wanted to. It just takes a little bit of will and a team. And I mentioned I wasn't going to talk about 81 very much, and I still am not, but I did want to mention it quickly in that my thesis project at Syracuse University, the School of Architecture, focused around the highway. And this was almost 15 years ago. So that was before the debate got really heated in terms of what to do with the viaduct. And so I started wondering, well, the reality of this is probably the viaduct is not going to go away fully, which is true. Thankfully, the debate's kind of going beyond saving the highway now and into how can we improve the community grid. But the reality is there still is a 690 running through the city east to west, and there are sections that are elevated as viaducts as well. So I won't dwell on this much, but this was just to quickly touch on this project to kind of start wondering, like, what happens if we live with the reality of this highway kind of bisecting the city still? Can we use the space around it? I mean, it's completely undesirable land. Nobody wants to be near the highway for living or shopping or working or really anything. But this is kind of wondering, like, well, what if we take some of these programs, these uses that are typically found in the suburbs, and bring them into the city around these highways? So this is, if you can kind of tell, like in the middle is the viaducts, the highway kind of running through at the interchange. And the thought was take things like movie theaters that are noisy and dark, and you kind of bury them underneath these overpasses since they don't need any natural light. And then maybe over top of this thing, you know, this upper level that can span across the whole highway, like that, maybe that's where you put your big box store. You can have like Target or an IKEA or something like that. And then the front face that faces the city faces south, something like urban farming and a farmer's market on the ground floor, and be able to utilize that space and the fact that there's natural sunlight coming in directly from the south and engaging with the community around it, and kind of, I guess in the end, kind of hiding the highway. Or this was kind of, as I was starting that blog, it was kind of a really quick exercise that just got me thinking. There's at the intersection of West Street and Onondaga Street, there's the lovely co-op building and a bunch of vacant land. And it was just kind of a quick wondering what would happen if we extend this idea of the co-op model in that particular case that works so well, and add a couple more buildings and create a neighborhood out of this. What could it do for that intersection? Or this has been kind of, this comes in waves, or just resurfaces every so often, that when something hits the bridge, the railroad bridge that goes over Onondaga Lake Parkway. And every time I cringe and think, like, why do we need the parkway in the first place? I mean, we have Old Liverpool Road immediately adjacent to it. Sure, there are a couple stoplights and driveways along the way, but I mean, you can still get from point A to point B from the city to the village of Liverpool in pretty much the same amount of time. Why do we have this like continuing debate about how to reduce the number of times that a large truck hits this overpass? And instead just rethink it entirely and ask, should there be vehicles on this at all? I mean, this was formerly the Oswego Canal that ran from downtown up to Lake Ontario. And although it's been a parkway for a long time, you know, the most, I think it's the most heavily used park in the county is Onondaga Lake Park. And the portion that's used the most heavily is from kind of the center of the park right in the village, kind of northward along the lake. And that also used to be a parkway just like this. And at some point, somebody had the foresight to say the same thing, like, what if we use this for recreation instead and shut it down? So why, I'm just floating the question, like, why is this possible here? Can we, you know, we already have this paved. Can we just remove the traffic from it and allow people to bike and run and so on along it instead? And kind of at the same time, this is also the the piece that has been puzzling designers of the Loop the Lake Trail the most. Like, how do we get past this train track and the parkway that's here so close to the lake? It's already there. Or in this case, in Armory Square, the creek walk is a lovely asset that we have, but it's still kind of just dead ends here at the train tracks right behind the most, and then the creek continues to the south, but you can't really continue to walk along that. And at the same time, we always talk about how the near west side is so disengaged from downtown. I mean, you have Fayette Street, and then way down much farther south, the Onondaga Street is pretty much the closest points that you can actually cross the creek from the west side, and realizing like, oh hey, there's a couple of buildings right here that actually used to be part of Armory Square, and there actually was once a bridge that kind of found its way under the train tracks and over the creek. And so did this quick study and then kind of wondering, well, what if we thread something back through that opening again? It's too short a space to bring vehicles through, but Armory Square is such a pedestrian heavy place. Can we build a pedestrian bridge that's somewhat interesting and iconic that can thread its way under the train tracks and over that, over the creek, and then actually start to draw some of that activity more towards the west side. Maybe things like new buildings pop up over there. These things can get reactivated, and then some of the great momentum that's already happening on the near west side, can have another connection point and help further, expand upon that. This is one of the more crazy ideas, but a long time ago had been, well, still am very interested in the history of the streetcars in the city, and how the neighborhoods kind of evolved and grew around the streetcar lines and nodes and so on. And in doing kind of nerdy research into like how the streetcars worked and what happened and why they shut down, and I can go on a long tangent about that. But I learned that a lot of these roads and streets that used to have streetcars along them can very cheaply, more cheaply than if they were didn't have something before, but relatively inexpensively have the same kind of infrastructure put back onto them again. Because one of the biggest costs in building a new streetcar line is relocating all the utilities that are in the way, because there's a lot of weight that these things engage with as they travel over the ground. And it turns out, because we had this network of streetcars historically, a lot of those utilities are already out of these right-of-ways that streetcars would normally travel over. So that's one of the biggest ticket items you can just throw out and say, and arguably reduce the cost of something like this. And so just for fun, I imagined this idea of the streetcar line that runs through north to south on along Salina Street, which I think it's a little bit cut off on the top, but that's okay. But the idea is like somewhere down by Green Hills, there's a lot of vacant strip mall retail there that could be the terminus where there's, you have the rail yard maintenance buildings and so on, and then it travels right up along Salina Street, which is one of the most heavily used bus lines in the city currently, and then all the way up to the regional market and the stadium, and potentially could extend to Liverpool. And then just did a quick little image of, what would this look like downtown? This was right before the Post Standard announced that they were going to be redoing this building, and I have no idea what the status of that is, if it's still happening or where they are in the design process. But this is something that's also bugged myself and had lots of conversations with other people about it over the years, that Clinton Square is such an important public space in our city, and most of the perimeter of it is not really publicly engaging. It's, in this case, I mean, now it's empty, obviously, since the newspaper moved, but even at the time it was active, it's office space, and you as a pedestrian or somebody using the square, aren't doing anything with this building. So as you walk by, it's just a series of windows, and a lot of times the shades are drawn, as you can kind of tell in this image, and this is buffer to keep people away from the building of these plantings. And so just quickly wondered, well, what happens if that street edge is rethought? Like, what if we you know, especially as the newspaper is downsizing, if they don't need all this space, can we slot a couple storefronts in there? I mean, it's not too difficult to do, and just think of what it could do. I mean, how amazing would it be if you could go to that brew pub or a little coffee shop or something there and actually sit on the square. You know, like you'd go to many places in Europe or other cities and you have this ability to sit right in the center of, like, one of their most important spaces in the city, and you can sit and people watch and enjoy the beautiful view of the architecture and so on. And so that was kind of like a random grab bag of things. And as the years went on, so this is somewhat more recently now, started to take this same kind of thinking and try to hone it in a little bit instead of these crazy ideas left and right. What happens is we kind of focus some attention on a specific neighborhood. And I live in Strathmore, so it's kind of a natural place to start to think about, you know, this park, the Onondaga Park that I love so much, and I think everyone who's ever been there, I'm sure loves this park. You know, it's beautiful. There's great events over the summer, and it doesn't need anything more, but there are things that it could probably benefit from, like to draw more people in and make it even more enjoyable. And so these are some really quick little, in lieu of scribbling things on paper, some like digital ideas. And so this is on the west side of the park, right along the kind of park road and the street road, abut one another with this little rock wall between. And something that's always stood out to me is the whole neighborhood is, this stretch of the neighborhood is on the National Register. And we've got these lovely power lines just splitting between these beautiful historic homes and the park on the other side. I walk down there and it's all I see are these power lines. So I just quickly wondered, well, what happens if we just replace those? I mean, with more historically appropriate streetlights, and so much more pleasant now as you go along that walkway. Or around the lake itself, Hiawatha Lake. I mean, historically, there's these, I should have put an image in here, but there's all these great old postcards of all the fun stuff that used to be around there, little pavilions and things for people to sit and engage with the lake and so on. So there's little remnants of it here and there, but by and large, most of this trail around the lake is this little gravel path that goes from, typically it's like a foot wide, and so if you're walking with somebody, you have to kind of walk single file or walk on the grass. So another quick wondering, well, what happens if we actually just put some pavers along there and make it like a more appropriate promenade along and around the lake? And this is one of these things these little things that really bug me. Yeah. Like this, almost every walkway into the park that touches a road, or the loop road around the park, has these barricades to keep cars from driving on them. But if you think about it, it's keeping everyone else from walking on it too. Like nobody can get across that. If you're pushing a stroller or in a wheelchair or you're riding your bike, you're confronted with this and you have to either kind of navigate around it on the grass or find an entirely different way. And it seems to me like such a no-brainer to just cut the middle of that thing out. And then you can actually use it again. You can traverse it. I don't know. It seems like a simple thing to me, but right near my house, there's a series of tennis courts. And I think there are 8 tennis courts, maybe, on this side of the park. And 6 of them are like very well kept and in good shape, and they're really well used. And then there are these 2 right here that there are these large trees on the one side that just drip sap on it all year long. And so because of that, they're difficult to maintain. And so these 2 just kind of sit there. And informally, a lot of people bring their dogs by and let them run around in there. And so it just gets me wondering, well, why don't we just embrace it and put a sign up and say, this is our neighborhood dog park. The infrastructure's there. It's already fenced in. Maybe you may need to add a little bit of embellishment and a couple things here and there, but it's a simple thing that we as a neighborhood can probably band together and do. Or if not that, maybe there are ways we can get something like a neighborhood community garden in there or something else. So this is something we see in a lot of our parks. These little outbuildings that I personally don't really know exactly what they were used for. This may house a pump for bringing water into the pond, or maybe it may have been a concession stand, or who knows, it could have been anything else. But just so many of our parks have them, and they sit there like this, where the openings are boarded up. And it's got me wondering, well, there's a lot of people around in the summertime. Can't we get some ice cream? Like what would happen if, even if it's the short windows, if these little pavilion buildings can reopen up and engage with people again? Just think of how much more fun it would be to go to the park and knowing that there's gannons in the middle of it to kind of reward you for wandering around. If anyone's familiar with the Onondaga Park specifically, there's the lake kind of on one end, and then there's this, which if you look and squint closely enough, you can kind of tell, you see these little rock walls around there, that actually the area of water used to be much greater. So there's the lovely bridge, the stone bridge that's still there, but as it is now, it's kind of at the edge of the current lake, and originally obviously it used to go across a larger body of water with these fun little islands and so on. And at some point, that was purposely drained and dewatered, and so we're left with this. And it got me wondering, I'm sure somebody had a good reason to do that in the past, but do we still need it to be like that? I mean, can we reintroduce water into this and add to the amenities of the park? And it's a shallower body of water, which is why I imagine it was removed. But the nice thing about shallower bodies of water is that they freeze more quickly, and you can get you can do ice skating and pond hockey and things on it. I think the 8 or 9 years I'd lived in the neighborhood, I think that the Hiawatha Lake that's there is maybe frozen over fully like once. And so it's something that's always enticed me. Like I really want to go ice skating on this, but it's never frozen enough to do so safely. It's just kind of the nature of the freeze thaw cycles that we have. But this shallower water might be possible. Another thing that's kind of universal to a lot of our parks in Syracuse, a lot of them are built on and around drumlins and these hills where you have some incredible views of the city. And so this is from Onondaga Park. You can get this great view into downtown, but it's just a little grassy knoll. It's a nice place to go walk up to. But what would happen if we had a pavilion up there so you can use it for more things than just kind of wandering up to? And there are picnics and parties and things all the time in the park. And why not offer another venue for them especially with this incredible view? And kind of lastly, it's kind of similarly to a lot of other parks, but this is one specific to the one in Strathmore. There's this beautiful fire barn that was recently converted into a community center, but it has a lot of really specific and strict rules around how it can be used. And so for that reason, it sits mostly empty for most of the year. And I start wondering why. I mean, does it need to be this way? Whether it's a community center like this or any other building that's on park property or adjacent to park property, something that may kind of expand into the larger discussion around zoning and land uses and so on. What happens if we allow a coffee shop to open in there, or a little cafe or something else? Again, kind of like the Clinton Square example. If you think about it, where do we have spaces like this in Syracuse where we can sit on a public square, a public park, and enjoy a cup of coffee at the coffee shop? It doesn't really exist, but it can. And so I'm running out of time. I'm going to speed up. The kind of like last thing now is to talk about some of these bigger picture ideas. 81 being amongst them, but I'll gloss over that for now as I start a slide with the larger 81 project. But part of we focus so much on this portion of the highway that's downtown, the viaduct, and what's going to happen with it. But there's a lot of other moving pieces and parts as part of the larger I-81 project, one of which is the complete overhaul of the West Street interchange with 690, which is amazing. He's very excited that this is part of the project. They're dramatically reducing the footprint of it, and one of the biggest and most exciting bits of it is that they're actually removing the bridge that makes West Street traverse over top of West Tennessee Street and creating an intersection there, which is great. So now all of a sudden this barrier that exists from between downtown and that portion of the west side is removed. And it kind of started spurring on this thinking of, okay, well, the DOT is thinking about that specific node of West Street, but what about the greater extent of West Street? And if you look at this thing, it's kind of crazy when you think about it. I'm sure we've all driven on it, and I don't know if anyone stopped to think, well, you don't want to stop in the middle of West Street, but as you're traversing down West Street, if you're kind of wondering, like, this thing seems massive, like, why is it so wide? It looks like this. It's actually three streets. And there's 3 lanes going north, 3 lanes going south, although parts of it have recently been converted into, a portion of that 3rd lane has been turned into on-street parking. And then there's a service road, which is actually the original West Street. And then this whole kind of stretch of the west side of West Street, which is kind of plowed through and demolished all the buildings and that portion of the neighborhood that was there to create this wide arterial that hardly gets used to the extent that you would think it would for the size. There are places like this in Brooklyn where if you have something this wide, this massive right of way, it can be done at least more nicely and elegantly. There's this nice, the separated kind of walking and biking path. The service lane is over there, but it's nicely tree lined and it doesn't feel as massive and open. It's the same footprint as what we have here, but it feels totally different. No trees that I can see along the street. And so the question arises, why do we even have this lane over here in the first place anymore? I mean, I think it was built at a time when we expected the city to grow to twice the size that it is, but clearly that didn't quite happen. So some of our infrastructure like this is very much overbuilt. So what would happen if we remove that and just thinking of this in real simple terms, what is the service lane now can be the northbound traffic. What is the main northbound traffic flow can be reversed, and all of a sudden you don't need those 3 lanes on the far west, and you could reclaim that. Could be a nice green parkway, kind of like that one example in Brooklyn, or it could be returned as developable land into the city and affordable housing, any other things to be built upon it. And just to look at it from another angle, back up from the sky, again, you can see just how much bigger this street is than any other thing around it. It's kind of the idea again, like what if we just slice off that whole West 3rd Street and utilize what we have, those other 2. And like I said, it could become a much nicer thoroughfare through the city, less of a high speed, high volume traffic, divisive street, and more of a thing that can weave the neighborhoods together. If you look at it in color, it looks like it's always been there, just like that. And then moving up West Street a little bit further, West Street clearly has been like bugging me lately, and there's a lot of bits and pieces to it. So, I mean, the upper right is the interchange is being fixed, but this is kind of the piece between that interchange and the portion I was just talking about, just off to the bottom here. Because the street was so wide, there were reasons they had to split it to go around what was the most recently the Red House, and it's kind of continues to be this really wide swath of traffic volume that really deters people from walking from east to west. But one of the bigger things is this. There's part of it, like a pretty sizable bit of land that's given to partial cloverleaf interchange, like right in the edge of downtown. And again, this question why, like how does it need to be there? Like does the traffic get that backed up that we need to be funneling people off in this way and taking up a whole bunch of land right in the middle of our city? Does that bridge need to be there anymore across? Can that be rethought? Like can this portion be reduced down from 500 lanes down to just a couple? And on and on and on. I put the slide in here I knew I was going to start getting too riled up about it, so as to remind me to calm down for a second. And go on a side tangent. So my wife is from St. Paul, Minnesota, which is probably about twice the size of here. It's a lovely place, although I keep the weather on my phone at all times. So if I ever feel like it's cold here, I'll just pull up St. Paul and say, like, okay, well, it's 20 degrees here, it feels cold, but it's -5 there, so it could be worse. But it's a very vibrant downtown. There's a lot of stuff going on, but obviously what's featured most prominently in this image in the foreground is their new minor league baseball stadium. It's a beautiful, designed by Snow Krylik, which I don't know if anyone knows architects in the room, but they're a local to Minnesota based firm. They do some beautiful, simple work. And what's so great about it, I'm not even really a sports guy or specifically a baseball guy at all. But this is the last time we were there, like one of the first things I wanted to do was go see the stadium because it's just so elegantly and simply and beautifully done. And one of the things that's so great about it is what you see there. It's right up against the edge of downtown. It used to be out in the middle of kind of industrial zone, and they specifically made an effort to figure out how to engage it with the city and put it where it is. And this is actually the front gate, the sidewalk that's there. That's the sidewalk right along one of the main streets in the city. So right on the other side of that street, if you were to look just off this image, it's storefronts and mixed-use buildings and things, and it's really part of the city fabric. And it's so fun that you can just be walking through downtown and walk up the steps and actually see. You don't even have to buy a ticket to go in. You can see through the fence there, the baseball game is going on. And so it's really integrated into the community, really interestingly. And of course, then it starts reminding us of this, which is our stadium here. And I know it's got a very storied and sore history. I don't really know all the politics of it, but I know there are lots of politics involved in why this ultimately ended up here. Because I know it was, at one point it was slated to go at the trolley lot in Armory Square, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't matter the history. This is what we have and where we're at now. And it's obviously very different from that. It would be a sea of parking, fully removing it from the neighborhood, and it's removed from many other uses and accessible pretty much only by car. I mean, there are little remnants of the on-track stations that never quite got connected and so on, but it's nothing like this. And so, anyways, that was my little aside from a recent trip to Minnesota. So back to West Street again. Now that I'm a little bit calmer. So these little cloverleaf interchanges take so much space. I mean, that one alone right there is this giant wedge of land that, A, is not really utilized for much, and B, just really creates a psychological divide. And again, we always talk about the psychological divide of 81 through downtown, but we have so many of these kind of borderlands around our city that divide neighborhoods and so on. And I think this contributes heavily to that. West Street and this interchange specifically on the west side of the city. And of course, there are some properties around it. There's an empty parking lot, and there's this little building, which actually is an active and successful building. But if you start to piece these things together, you start to realize, what fits perfectly there is a baseball stadium, kind of similar to what's in St. Paul. And because I got on these rabbit holes and get way too into these things, like I actually measured the whole thing out and figured out if and how it would fit. And then I won't belabor you with all the things that I did, but essentially this is actually to scale, and this thing fits pretty perfectly in that spot. A third of that land is already, is state owned. This thing's for sale, and then just have to ask nicely to see if somebody would move out and take over their building and for the greater good, and you get this. But just think about how different that would be if our stadium was there. And in reality, and from my opinion, like less shoehorned in than if we were to try to figure out how to put it on the trolley lot. And then start to think about how that can engage with this rethinking of what is West Street and better connecting across that, and how all of a sudden we can start to knit these neighborhoods together using these important pieces of public infrastructure. So just think of the difference of, this is what, if you go to a baseball game now, it's pleasant, it's nice. Like, it's nice to look out and see the trees and so on. But just think of the difference, if that were your view when you're sitting in your seat. It's kind of fun. And then I cut it off there because I know that I could go on for ages, but I wanted to make sure there's time for questions and discussion.
So Jason, maybe I'll start with the first question. It seems like a lot of Syracuse development centers around the automobile. It seems like that has screwed up a whole bunch of things, and to make any changes, like everybody would probably bow down to the automobile. Or like one of the ideas that I had while I was watching a concert at Armory Square, which I think, you know, they put up a little trailer stage in front of the most, or just up the street there by the time clock, where and I said, wouldn't it be really cool if that part of Franklin Street were closed off and that was made a public square, a real public square in Franklin Square? I don't know what the traffic issues would be, but I think that, you know, would be a space that could accomplish some of the things you mentioned over by the Post Standard building, where you could have businesses selling coffee and people could hang out in that square like they do in Europe and other, you know, in other places.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point. I always think back to the discussion in 81. So I mean, that is so all-consuming almost, in a lot of what we do in our lives. But you know, one of the things I hear the most often is, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to get to work? Or how, like, where am I going to go if my route isn't there? But in reality, we know that we have a pretty robust street grid in the city, and if you close something off, there are lots of other ways to go. And so I think it's a very realistic thing to do, and I think it's just from experience, the selling it is like what's the hard part, is just convincing people who may not be so excited about the idea that your daily routine might change slightly, but just think about how much better it will be. To be able to go and sit at that square and sip your coffee, or just even walk through it during your lunch break, or whatever, any number of things like that. And I think that we're ripe for that kind of, rethinking, to keep using the same word, of our streets and our spaces. And I think it just, through enough kind of championing and public will, I think once the first thing like this happens, I think that it may kind of open up some hearts and minds to the idea that, okay, oh yeah, it didn't cause Carmageddon, or didn't, make me half an hour late to work, or, it actually improves my life. And I think that's kind of the idea with any of these things, that at any number of scale, is that once some of these things start to happen, it kind of snowballs into more positive things.
I will let other people ask questions, but I want you to get to at some point. So do we need to create a more formal way for some of these ideas to gain some traction, to get to be larger snowballs? Does there need, I know that the Architects Center does some thinking and projects down on the AIA project. Bob does that. But is there sort of a governmental infrastructure or civic infrastructure to allow these kind of things to see the light and start engaging with the political leaders that can put their weight behind them?
I don't think it's necessary, but it's something that would definitely help. I think a lot of people who may have ideas, whether it's to add a dog park in their neighborhood, or completely redo all of West Street, a lot of people might have thoughts and ideas, but no understanding of who or where they should be engaging with. So having a government entity, for example, is an excellent place for that. If it's a kind of spur of the innovation team that's at City Hall or something else that kind of could directly deal with these quality of life things, I mean, could be really amazing. But I think a lot of it also is just having conversation and keeping it going. And if you get enough like-minded people that are interested in making something happen, it's going to happen. And the people are going to figure out a way. If we all say, like, we want the center of Armory Square to be a square devoid of cars, with enough time and thinking and figuring out how to make it possible, it'll happen. And the more people that are invested in it, the more likely and quickly it would happen. So, and it's something that I encourage all of us to do when and however we can, is to engage in that civic discourse and try to overall make our city a better place.
Okay, I'm going to cheat and take the next question. What project, you had lots of great ideas, and there's another 1,000 great ideas out there. What project should the city be focusing on and next, other than the community grid, I-81, but what projects should the city be trying to tackle first that would have the biggest impact in creating a little more pride in our city?
This is probably going to be the most difficult question of the day. Well, it's hard to not talk about 81. I think, though, at the risk of sounding like I'm copping out of with an answer, but I think that there is no single big project. There's no mall that can totally change the way we view the city or anything. And I think it's all about a lot of that neighborhood scale stuff that I was mentioning. If enough of these things start to happen around the city, it's the little things that, we can have these big discussions about 81 and other things and these bigger ideas, but in the end, they happen at such a glacial pace and they're kind of a little bit out of our control. But a lot of these smaller scale things, we have the ability to make happen. And as more of the stuff, and those are the things that often will probably bug us personally the most, like knowing that we can't, this community grid and what's going on around that is always frustrating, and we want it to be better and improved and faster and so on. But like I said, those telephone poles in Onondaga Park are just every time I see them, they bug me. And so in that way, I think trying to engage with and pick at these little tiny quality of life things that actually have a big psychological impact on people may ultimately, at least for people living in the city, have the biggest impact in a piecemeal way like that.
Okay. Next.
Over there in the green.
I'm probably going to reiterate what was said, but you had mentioned that Syracuse was a city of neighborhoods. I grew up in Brooklyn. I came here directly from Manhattan. A story I love to tell is a couple of years later, I brought my aging mother up here, direct from the Upper East Side, Manhattan. She got out of the car, looked up and down the street and said, "Where is everybody?" And neighborhoods are about people, and cities are about interesting gathering places for people. They're not about cars. That's the big issue that we have. And I think you mentioned that changes are glacial politically, but I think things can be accomplished by individual example. I jump-started the current restoration of Hawley Green when I first came here. Everyone told me I'd lose my shirt. Everyone told me it was crazy. I painted a house, and then people came out of the woodwork and started painting their houses. And I lived in the co-op building afterwards. That neighborhood is starting to organically come together. The Salt City Coffee House had a lot to do with it. A bank is renovating one of the mansions across the street now from the co-op. They managed to get the rescue mission to stop advertising Skid Row on the bridge, and that's been repainted. When the photo you showed of the great street in Brooklyn, that was Eastern Parkway, which was designed by the man who designed Central Park, and it was originally designed for horse traffic. But it's a street that's designed to accommodate people as well as automobiles. The trees, Brooklyn is known as the tree-lined borough of Brooklyn, but the trees on the islands between the thoroughfare have benches on them that people sit on. So you have to put people first. That's what we have to start to learn to do. And a very good example of that is there is public art right near here. There's a sculpture of a sofa facing Erie Boulevard. So you can sit on the sofa and watch the cars go by. I was with a number of other Syracusans at a conference in Chattanooga a few years back. They have the identical sofa near their main bus stop, and everyone uses mass transit there. And we were all getting silly, throwing ourselves on the sofa. When the bus came, I was blown away. On the left window was the destination. On the right window was Choo Choo. And Chattanooga Choo Choo, the song, was played in every store. It came out of loudspeakers. People got silly. We are spectacularly devoid of a sense of humor here. When I first moved here, and I'm not being glib now, outside of Armory Square, there are all these brown and gray buildings, and I thought, this is not a place that you have a good time in. This is where you come to be punished, you know? And we are starting to see color, and I was very impressed with your color initiative. I think we need more of that. We need to make this a place that's appealing to people. The feedback I've gotten from friends who've come to visit me from out of town is there really are a lot of things to do. And on our behalf, I was amazed at how much there is to do here when I first came here. But it's all spread apart. And that's antithetical to city living. West Street, I thought one of the big tragedies was, to my understanding, the ballpark and the train station were originally supposed to be put along West Street. And I thought that would have been terrific, especially a ballpark right in back of Armory Square. That's where you go and have a beer afterwards. The ballpark, our current ballpark, is really good looking in the middle of nowhere, frankly. It's, you know, so I think we have to, and I'm not sure of how to do it. I didn't grow up with cars. I think mass transit really, there are enormous virtues to using mass transit. It transports large numbers of people around efficiently. It doesn't destroy the earth. And when you ride buses, I could write a book about the hilarious conversations I overheard on the New York City subways in my lifetime. You learn to enjoy people. You learn to respect people. It doesn't hurt you to wait 2 minutes for a man with a wheelchair to get on. And I think one of the deficits, and we really are seeing social results of it, of the car culture, is it inspires selfishness. You know, you're encased in metal, you don't relate to anybody else, and everyone's a big shot. So I think it's really important for us, and I don't know how to do it, to somehow get streetcars on the streets and mount a campaign that makes mass transit attractive. I do think that climate change may work on our behalf. We're going to have to become a less car-driven society. But what you were saying, I think in small pockets of just creating interesting places for people to enjoy the city and get people out on the street and make it a visually appealing place. So.
I completely agree.
First of all, Jason, oops, sorry. Thank you very much. The creative ideas are always terrific. How do I do this? It's great to see your instincts, which are the talents of an architect or a designer or anybody in the design field, you know, kind of form your questions and then you go look to the neighborhood to solutions and then you develop a response. I know. That's what the design process is. To John's point, we tend to need a common repository, a local center, or these design ideas to come to from Jason and many others like Jason who create these ideas from their response to a neighborhood condition, just like you came up here and painted the houses. Those are the powerful responses. I think the crazy ideas are the good ideas. And they come from passionate people. What we don't have in this town, and we used to have, John, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, was that in City Hall, they had landscape architects and architects in a 15 to 16 person agency that was the design repository for guiding the infrastructures of the city. City urban planning, city planning, a design center with, but from a design point of view, That's me. From a design point of view, that's what's so great because your ideas are visual, they're powerful, whether they're color or pattern. West Street's a disaster, and it was put in at the same time I-81 was, it's part of the I-81 system and is not being addressed by the DOT. We have asked them for 5 years to reduce West Street and reheal the separation. It was a deliberate separation of the whole west side and caused the deterioration and economic and separation of families and economies. It's as bad a disaster as the viaduct on the other side, on the east side of the city, but because the hospitals and the universities are there, that's being addressed, and it's not being addressed on the west side. Those are big issues. I'll stop because I'm more pleased to see your good ideas, and we need to have more of those in a place that informs the public in a design center of some sort for urban futures. We're at this point where we're going to make these changes now because of I-81, not in the city, but around the county as well. We're having the same discussions at the mayor's office yesterday afternoon, trying to get the SOCPA back into a leadership, not just an agency of statistics and data and not really informing the future. It's weak, but that's what we are able to do in the next 5 years in this area. So thank you.
Well, I always learn from Bob. And I didn't realize, because when I spoke, I've spoken about 81 too, and I said, what about West Street? Why is 81? So you're telling me that 81 is not part of the design at all regarding what's going to happen with the community grid or 81?
They're taking down the massive part of it over West of Tennessee Street, which is terrific. But the rest of the strip is not being addressed in an urban response.
That's outrageous. Well, I'm glad to know. I'll bring it up. I hope we all can bring it up.
The extents only really go from the interchange here to West Tennessee Street and a little bit farther south when they're stopping, they're not looking at the entirety of West Street.
And that's huge. Also, as I was explaining to David earlier, the flyovers are gone, the flyovers are gone. It used to go from 690 west to 81 north. Those are not in the community grid. That was one of the biggest changes we've had that are positive.
And that's a good example too of enough people being loud about this. Just saying that we don't have currently, nor do we need this connection from 690 east going north and vice versa. And it's going to be more detrimental to our neighborhood than it will be than it will benefit the cars using it. And so thankfully they scrapped it because enough people spoke up about it.
I'll get over my shock and try to ask my question about that issue. Anyway, is getting back to what John was saying, and I think, I'm glad to hear, Bob, you were at the mayor's office about SOCPA, because that's only, anything is good in that direction, obviously, is Stephanie Pasquale, it was just reported in the news yesterday, has stepped down. So a couple things this week have happened, and I'm wondering if those are things to leverage. And so that's what my question's about, is just what's happened this week, is that she has stepped down. So an idea might be is to ask Ben and everyone who's doing the hiring for that person who is the leader of neighborhood development and all the community development funding that comes through the city, to have open forums and to maybe encourage him to hire, to have community input in the hiring, maybe even have the people who are the top 3 give presentations about their visions of the city. And then the public can come to those, have this, put the burden back on City Hall to take a leadership role if they're serious about it. Because it was even in the paper, it pays $89,000. So maybe there's an opportunity to really bring in some competence and outside ideas, whether from St. Paul or wherever else. There's other cities certainly that have put their ball fields right downtown. Denver's a perfect example. They butted it up right up against the buildings, and it is used exactly as you describe in St. Paul. The other thing that happened this week, and I'm curious if anyone went, I didn't have time, was last night, the green drinks people, that a lot of people, was anybody there last night? They met at that new speakeasy, which is a good, maybe a good advance in Syracuse. I've never been there. Has anyone did anyone go last night? The green drinks group met last night in collaboration with the Central New York chapter of the American Planning Association, which I didn't even know that had been reinstigated. you know, we have such a lack of certified planners in the area, but Ben in this room made a point that he and Ryan agreed to hire a certified planner in Dan, the leader of SACPA. So that was just last night at the, so those are two good, two things to think about. I wish I had gone. I didn't know anyone was there. I thought some people from Green USA went to Green Drinks. It's a busy night, a busy time of year, but it just seems like there's some opportunities there to put the burden back on the city and county, like Bob is doing obviously at City Hall, and try to get them to sponsor more openness, more transparency. That's what Greening USA, is known for and can really excel at, is to try to keep the light under the fire there. And my question to you originally was, how is West Street and some of your ideas being incorporated into, because you've got some great ideas there, and anything that could be put, visually out there for people to hear, because your story is a fantastic one. I'd like to see, hear more about it, Yeah, no, but I mean, I think other people would be, especially young people. I was at the Tech Garden, what was it, Tuesday night? Yeah, Wednesday night, where they had their big drone event. Yeah, there was even free alcohol, because so much money from Como is going into the drones. So these young people there, they could be, they moved here. I met a girl who said to me, she just moved up here from DC in June. She has no friends in Syracuse, hasn't met anybody. Why? 22 years old, working for one of these drone companies that got $1 million. It's a sad story. She has a therapy dog. I mean, that's a terrible thing to hear. It's nice she's got a dog, and I met the dog and all, but I mean, come on. So anyway, I'll get off my.
I wish I had a good answer for you, though, in terms of how we're disseminating these stories and sharing our stories and things. And I confess that I technically am a millennial, but I'm on the early end of the millennials, so I'm not as perfectly engaged with social media. Is not like a second part of my brain, so I'm not very good with engaging with it. But I feel like there are probably ways that we could be continuing this dialogue and sharing our stories and things in a digital way that's accessible and approachable to anybody. Whether it's social media or like YouTube videos or more of like public forums or any kind of number of things, like something like Green Drinks, like anything. If there's a way that we can build on this conversation, the momentum, and keep it going. I wish I had an answer on how to do that, but I definitely agree that it should be done.
And by the way, it was 3 groups last night. They met together, which is a wonderful thing. Green Drinks, the Central New York chapter of the American Planning Association, and the regional GIS users group. And they have over 60 people just on their listserv alone. That's why I was invited. And they do meet monthly too. So these young people are obviously trying to glue things together and want to learn from us old folks. And, I think there's some real good dynamism, coming forward. And I think we should be part of it. Hopefully.
I just wanted to add that go ahead, sir.
We have another
comment. I just wanted to say real quick that just coming from Minneapolis, St. Paul area, it's a much bigger metro area, but to come and end up moving, I come to school here and then settling down here in Syracuse, something that I don't know if people that are right from here, like Jason, I don't know if it's taken for granted or not, but being in a smaller city is actually really powerful. Your voice has a lot of weight. You can make change in much easier than so many more layers of bureaucracy in a large city metro area. It can feel really daunting to do anything in places like that. But I think Jason has demonstrated to me over and over, just knowing you, about how your voice has an impact, and it's speaking it, having your ideas out there, but also like in our neighborhood, for example, if you don't feel like you have the means to go talk to the mayor here, or county executive, or somebody in a bigger scale here in our area, just go to your park association in your neighborhood and start small, bring your little ideas to your neighborhood group and just, take civic pride in your immediate place. And, you just kind of want to snowball those ideas, and eventually people there like-minded, it's kind of, it'll rub off. If things get done in one neighborhood, oh, I want to do that in our neighborhood. It's kind of an easy way to get it done. And like I said, it is a smaller metro area here, and you can do anything. You can start a business, you can have an impact, you know, it's great. Yeah.
You can sell cupcakes.
I just wanted to add, Jason, your efforts on the neighborhoods and then what you found at crafts fairs where people come up and tell you their personal stories about each of the neighborhood is really terrific. With the huge efforts each neighborhood has TNT sections, neighborhood meetings, which at Nottingham with Dave's group there. And they come together every month and they deal with policy issues and so on. There's not enough design ideas and design leadership that really could take them forward. That's what's kind of missing there. And it's in many ways what you've done with the neighborhood posters and then people coming to you from the neighborhoods telling their stories has been more effective than our city's TNT, tomorrow's neighborhoods, today's infrastructure, and creating ideas and public response to the place, the physical place. I've been involved with that for years, but what you've done through your posters has probably generated more individual interest in their own world of their neighborhood than many of those public meetings. I wished it were the other way around.
It kind of touches.
I think we have time just for one more.
It kind of touches upon Diane's initial question too. Is I really do believe like doing these things on these smaller scales and tapping into everyone's individual passions will ultimately have the biggest impact because we're fixing all these little things. You know, and when my first thing was to try to, change the perception that people have in the city and instill a little bit more pride in the neighborhoods in the city. And that was my way, just having this interest in graphic design, my way of doing that, but it's not the only way. And there's a lot of different ways, a lot of skills and passions that everyone in the room has and anyone in the city has that have tapped into can have tremendous, make a tremendous difference.
Thank you, Jason. It's been very, very interesting. This is a perfect example of part of the problem that we have right here, the slide that you have here, because as far as I know, there's the DOT does not have a way, there isn't a way where we, let's say the city, and unfortunately the county is Johnny come lately to this whole thing because originally every single county legislator voted against the community grid. And so, they still, as far as I know, are really not on board with this. And so, but they should be. But to get to the point here, for example, if you see, that's the creek walk, that's a new creek walk on the west side. See it right here, right next to West. That's a new creek walk. And then it goes under, and look what happens. It zigzags. That's a very, very, very steep hill there, and it has to zigzag up. And you get it, then it ends up at Evans Street. Well, if you look at the larger map on Evans Street, that's, you're putting people in nowhere. And I mean, my point is that that's what this is all DOT, New York State DOT design, you see. But where is the review? Where is the citizens group for the bicycle trail people, the landscape people, the community living around that area and so forth? I mean, that kind of a thing should be taking place, and maybe SACPA Bob should be coordinating that, because that's a very important thing. But we don't have any input on it, but we should. I mean, we should be getting together and saying, okay, stop, DOT, stop. We want you to come and present this, and let's redesign it if necessary, but let's sit down, and you can't pursue, we will not let you proceed until such time as the community and all the people, the various representatives from, this is part of the new bicycle trail, you see. I don't know whether you've looked at the DOT documents in detail, but there is a new bicycle trail. But that sort of leaves you in that very expensive thing zigzagging up that very steep hill, leaves you in the middle of nowhere. Do we really want that, for example? It's very expensive to do that, because the whole bridge where all that goes under has to be wider and so forth, where the creek goes under. I mean, and this whole area down below, if you look at the details of the And you can go online and you can go to the DOT website and you can look at this. And you can see there's some seating areas out there, one thing or another. Well, is that the way we want to do it? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's a beautiful design. I don't know, because as far as I know, nobody has inputted on this. So that's something that we definitely could be looking at, is how to get the coordination and how to get DOT to respond to a group, yourself, other people, maybe Greening USA, who knows?
You hit perfectly on what part 2 of this presentation should be. That when I started putting this stuff together, I was really focused on a lot of the larger Interstate 81 stuff because it is so prominent, and then decided to go a totally different route. But that was really where some of it was going to start driving, was to now that we at least thankfully have a direction in terms of the community grid is more or less a certainty. The conversation needs to start shifting now to these kinds of things and talking about the real human scale elements of the designs. The conversation is always around how we're going to move cars from point A to point B, or how we can sprinkle in a little bit of bicycle infrastructure to meet some requirements. But in reality, do those things serve us as a community and as individuals? Like you said, like this little zigzaggy pathway that goes up there, that probably doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But it's now, whether it is in a more formal sense of something could be or should be coming in terms of like public forums of the DOT, or if it's other things that we can be doing. I don't really know what the best route is at this point, but this is where we need to start transitioning our focus now, is like how wide these, the actual Almond Street's going to be, and how you're going to cross the street, and what can be developed along there, and what kinds of street furniture might there be, and how are these pathways along Creek Walk actually functioning and working and engaging, and why doesn't that trail continue under Western Syracuse? Why does it curl up and around and back? And yeah, there's a lot of work ahead of us all.
So thank you to Jason.
I forgot, I should have put my email up there, but if I know the answer. I think it's rethinksyracuse@gmail.com if anybody would like to continue the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.